I am excited for tonight's message. I have had some incredible insights over the last couple of days, and my new episode for the podcast, Self Mastery Sundays, will be out, I believe, this Sunday. And it's an interesting new episode based on some realizations that I had over the last few days. Some of that I'm going to talk about in today's episode or in today's message. And some you're going to have to go watch the podcast to really understand how deep this goes. But I want to start off today because last week we talked about comparisons. And this is part of a 5-week series on being joy, right? How to be joyful in a stressful world. And last week we talked about comparisons. Well, this week we have another really big log that called materialism that affects everyone's ability to experience the joy that's already there within them. But before I get into that, I want to address something. What if I told you you are already your highest self? What goes through your mind when I say that? Because if you're here and if you're watching this either live or on YouTube, then you're searching. And for most people, they're searching for their highest self, and so was I. And then I came to a realization. What if you were already your highest self? What if you were already born as your highest self? And the only thing that's in the way of you experiencing your highest self is the thought that you're not. What if it really was just that simple? See, in Genesis 1:26 and 1:27, it says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In his image, in the image of God, he created them male and female." So what that mean, by you already being created in the image of the Creator, that is your highest self, your true self? What if it was just simply the recognition that you are already divine? Just from being created. The challenge is there's something that gets in the way called the ego, the false identity. What if the recognition that, or of this false identity, what if the recognition that that is a false identity is all you needed to do to recognize your highest self? Because your highest self has no limitations. But the identity that you construct in your formative years, that has limitations. I experienced this recently for myself. For those of you who know a lot about my story, the last 5 years have been the dream years. And what I mean by that is I remember being 18, 19 years old, having been fresh off of a suicide attempt, and imagining what the most successful version of me looked like and who I needed to be in order to have that version of success. And I pursued it for years. And then right around 2019, 2020 is when I started to really experience the fruits of that labor. And my income shot up. And during those next few years, I literally had like this meteoric rise where I'm traveling the world, driving my dream car, riding first class. I mean, you name it, everything that I dreamt of when I was sleeping on couches or in the back of a hookah lounge or living in other people's homes and needing to borrow money, everything that I had was sacrificing in the books that I was reading, in the conferences I was going to, in the hotel rooms that I was sleeping in, all of that. In 2020, 2021, 2022, 2023, I was living the highest version of the self that I had dreamt of when I was homeless. I hope that makes sense. And I remember when all of that came crashing down. And it was last year when Cam told me she was pregnant. All of a sudden, it's like I remember when Cam said, I'm pregnant. And I just felt my whole world crumble in that moment. And I know some of y'all are thinking, Steve, that's not how you should think about your baby. That's true. But Steve Bacon, that did not fit his model. He had just started living this dream life that he thought he needed to live because he had his idea of what it meant to be a successful person, what it meant to be a man, what it meant to be a good husband, or what it meant to be a good son, or a good father, or a good example to the world. He had in his mind this identity that he constructed, this identity of what was necessary in order for him to consider himself a successful man. And a baby was not a part of that. So when Cam told me she was pregnant and I was in Mexico and we're on Zoom, I froze. I froze to the point where she asked, hey, is the connection still there? And I'm like, yeah, it's here. But what happened was my identity, the identity that I had up until that point froze. It's like my ego knew the gig was up. That the life that you've been living has changed forever. And Steve Bacon had a hard time identifying with that. He had a hard time letting go of that identity because people was giving him praise and people was like, oh my God, you're an inspiration and I want to go to your class and I want to be coached by you. And he was drinking his own Kool-Aid. And he's like, I'm finally the guy, as Jim Rome used to say, you get to the point where when you're at the bottom, you're like, that's the guy. But then you get to the point where you walk into a room and people look at you and go, that's the guy. Well, I was at a point in my life where that's the guy. I walk into a room and they go, that's Steve Bacon. And Steve Bacon was drinking his own Kool-Aid. And so here he is living at the top. He's got the house, he's got the car, he's got the trips, he's got the stuff. And then here comes the baby. And for a year and a half, Steve Bacon froze up because this wasn't what my life was supposed to be. Yes, I thought about having kids, but not really. I was enjoying the life. This is what I worked for. And then when he couldn't keep it together, he lost it. Literally lost his mind. And in that space, there was a separation. See, I was laying on the couch and I had on the Gaia Network. And there was this docuseries on awareness. And I'm laying there and I'm half asleep. And I had just spent the whole day crying because it just felt like such a failure because this life that I built that everybody was so proud of, I couldn't figure out how to keep it together. I couldn't figure out how to keep the keep it going. Because again, that was all of me was tied to that identity. Give me a heart if this is making sense, if y'all still listening. But I was tied to this identity. And so when it couldn't stay together, it was like my whole self was crumbling to the point where it ended up in literally a nervous breakdown. And I remember calling my dad and I was crying to my dad on the phone. And it was the first time in history where I gave my dad, or Steve Bacon gave his dad, the opportunity to be a dad. 39 years, Steve Bacon finally gives his dad the opportunity to be a dad and says, Dad, I feel like I failed everybody. And he says, Son, that's just in your head. He said, I'm so damn proud of you. He said, and everybody at some point needs help. And right now, you need help. I said, I know, Dad, but I built up this persona, this identity. I had the life. I worked my ass off to live this life, and I feel like it's crumbling and I can't keep it together and I don't know what to do. And if what happens if we lose the house? And what happens if I lose the car? And what happens? What's people gonna want to talk to me? Are people gonna want to coach with me? And all of a sudden, it's like one of those movies, it's like the Matrix when the agents would like leave, get into somebody's body and then they would try to separate and then they come back and then separate and then come back. And it's all of a sudden, I'm feeling Steve Bacon separate a little bit and then come back and separate a little bit and then come back. And so I'm laying on the couch that night and I'm half asleep and I'm watching the Gaia Network, and this guy says, so simple. He says, the self, listen carefully. He said, the self will never attain enlightenment. I want you to catch that. He said, the self could never get there. He says, even if you do all of the plant medicines and you do the cold plunges and you do all the personal development and you do all the coaching and you do all of that as the self, if you do it as the self could never attain what you're looking for, that nirvana, the kingdom. The self could never attain it because it's the self that's in the way. It's the identity that's in the way. Can y'all get that? When you remove the identity, it was in that moment when the guy said that and I'm half asleep, all of a sudden, all I hear is, there is no Steve Bacon. That's right, Lola May. There is no Steve Bacon. Steve Bacon was a character. And he was limited. He had reached the end of what he was capable of. Because with the ego, with that you build over time, the story, that comes automatically with limitations. See, when you're born, you have no concept of self. You're just pure possibility. And then one day, you become aware. And from that moment that you become aware, now, not to mention, you've already had all of these things being told to you from 0 to 7. But in that moment that you become aware, you start to ask yourself, who am I? What am I capable of? Why am I here? Where am I going? And where am I from? But in those who am I and what am I capable of? If the words I'm capable of anything, if those words I'm capable of anything don't utter out of your mouth, then it's a lie. The moment you start deciding what you're capable of or not capable of, what's your skill set, what's not your skill set, what you think you deserve or don't, that's when you begin to develop the lie. Does that make sense? You are already perfect. But then you start to compare yourself to other people. Fear starts to kick in. Limiting beliefs begin to kick in. And now all of a sudden, you've built this identity or this construct of who you are based on the environment you grew up in and based on all the things that you heard and based on everything you've experienced. You created this construct, and that construct called your identity automatically comes with limitation. The truth about you is that you are already your highest self. It is the ego, the false identity that you are attached to, that's keeping you from realizing your highest self. Because the false identity that you are attached to, the dream that you are in, called your name and all of your past history, that dream that you are in is what's keeping you from seeing yourself as your highest self already or actualizing that. That's why in this book, The Way of Mastery, he talks about waking up from the dream that you call your identity. And one of the things, the logs that is attached, that has you attached to this dream, is materialism. Scripture says, do not store up for yourselves treasures of earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. What he's talking about is cultivating the wisdom, the love, the compassion that already exist inside of you, that no amount of material can give you. See, a lot of times we mistake material and the pleasure that we feel in that moment. We mistake that for happiness. We mistake that for joy. We mistake that for love. When really the attainment of stuff is just a chemical reaction. The dopamine. And because it makes us feel good, we mistake that for satisfaction. But then something called the law of familiarity kicks in. And all of a sudden, you need something else. That car is no longer good. That spouse is no longer good. They don't make me feel the way they used to make me feel. That house is no longer okay. And let me help you understand something. Socially or society-wise, getting you hooked on material, that was a game plan. You can watch the docuseries Century of the Self on YouTube and see that getting you hooked on materials or material things was part of the game plan to keep you docile. See, you were fine with the shirt that you were wearing until somebody told you that you weren't fine with that. You were okay with the car you were driving until somebody told you that's not okay. The whole point of marketing is to convince you that what you have is not enough. That's most of society today. It's just people convincing you that what you already have is not enough so they can sell you what they got. But what does that create? That constant need for materialism steals your joy because it's constantly creating stress. Worried about getting more and more than what you have. The burden of materialism is never being satisfied and never knowing when enough is enough. And not realizing that you can never have enough of what you never needed in the first place. The burden of materialism is strained relationships, prioritizing things over people. I see it all the time, especially when I'm working with people at a very wealthy capacity. The misery that existed. I'm not saying being wealthy makes you miserable. What I'm saying is when you prioritize your wealth, your things, your possessions over what truly matters, then it will strain your relationships, not just with others, but even with yourself. When you are burdened by materialism, you lose focus. When you're burdened by materialism, you fear losing. You begin to, once you get what you desire, now you're playing the game of life not to lose instead of playing to win, because you think that your self-worth is tied to the things you have and you can't afford to lose it. So in that, you start to become disconnected from yourself. Because you begin to lose focus, or in touch, you begin to become out of touch with who you really are. The burden of materialism causes envy and jealousy. And now, instead of appreciating and being grateful for what you have, you start looking around going, well, look what they got. Well, I want that. Forget what I got now. I want that. The burden of materialism causes exhaustion. Constantly working to maintain a lifestyle that leads to mental and physical burnout because you really don't want to be doing what you're doing, but you're only doing it because you want to keep the stuff you got because all your self-worth is tied into what you got. So you cause unnecessary stress. The pressure or the burden of materialism causes debt. Because now you keep wanting to sign up for this credit card and that credit card to get on this financing program and that financing program. Why? Because the stuff that you have is no longer providing the dopamine hit that it once gave you, and you need new dopamine. You're an addict. You're an addict. You're addicted to stuff because you're addicted to the emotion that the stuff gives you. Or should I say, your identity is addicted to the stuff. You are already your highest self. But the identity that you cling to is addicted to the stuff because the identity that you cling to has concocted this story that in order to be worthy and to be loving and to be whole and to be worth something, you need to have the stuff. It's the story of the rich ruler in the Bible. When he came to Jesus and said, Jesus, what do I need to do to enter the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus said, follow all the commandments. And the man said, well, I've already done that, Jesus. What am I lacking? He says, go sell all of your possessions and give it to the poor. And once you do that, you'll find the kingdom. And the man looked at him perplexed. And I've always said this before, that poverty pimping pastors have used that scripture to convince you that being poor is being holy. But that's not what that scripture meant. That scripture simply meant that he needed that man to recognize he was everything with nothing, because that man was searching for the kingdom. But if he already had everything and he still needed to search for the kingdom, that means the stuff that he had couldn't give him the feeling that he was after. And so Jesus told him, sell everything, because that's what you're attached to. And in order for you to feel the kingdom, in order for you to experience the kingdom for what it truly is, I need you to recognize that you are everything with nothing, because this identity of you being the rich ruler is the only thing that's standing in between you and experiencing the kingdom, i.e., your highest self. But you can't do that when you believe that your worth is based on what you own. You can't do that when you believe that the more you have, the happier you'll be. You can experience your highest self when you believe that your success is measured by how much you have compared to what other people have. You can't experience your highest self when you believe that money is the most important thing in life. You can't experience your highest self when you believe that if you don't have the latest, you're falling behind. You can't experience your highest self if you believe that people will respect you with the more things you have. Oh, when I get this car, they really gonna be, woo! They're gonna be wanting to party with me. You can't experience your highest self when you believe you need to keep up with others to fit in. You cannot experience your highest self when you believe that you can't be happy unless you get more. You cannot experience your highest self when you believe that the more money you make, the more successful you are. You cannot experience your highest self when you believe that you can't be content until you have hit a certain financial goal. You cannot experience your highest self when you believe that showing off what you have proves your worth. All of this is the illusion of the construct you have created. And it is time for you to wake up. Wake up from the dream that you've been dreaming. Wake up from the dream that you've been dreaming. And for some of you, it's been a complete nightmare. And I want you to understand that I am here today as your spiritual alarm clock. It is time for you to wake up to your truest self, your highest self. And there is absolutely nothing you need to do other than to let go of this created self. Because that's really what Jesus meant when he said, "Get back behind me, Satan." He was not talking about some red man with a fork and a pitch. He was talking about his ego. Get back behind me. Because it is that little gnat called the ego that is responsible for your suffering. Because when you wake up from the dream, come here, come close. When you wake up from the dream, you know what you realize? There's no suffering. You lack nothing. You need nothing. And everything is perfect. But Steve, what's going on in the world? That's the construct. That's the collective consciousness. Your job is to wake yourself up first. And if you're feeling guilt, shame, worry, doubt, fear, disappointment, you're still asleep. And it's not until you wake yourself up. You can't wake everybody else up. Jesus said it perfectly. If you would take the log out of your eye, you will clearly see how to help your brother. Now, before we go, there's someone I'd like to thank. She was, I guess you could say, assigned to me a few years ago. And I'm grateful because she shows up right on time. And as I was going through this separation of self, when I got a chance to step back and see Steve Bacon, the construction, she was there because my question was, well, I see I'm not him. Now what? And she showed up right on time with the perfect message. And I want to introduce y'all to my auntie, Miss Esther Jones. Come on in, Esther Jones. And give her a virtual round of applause. This is my auntie, Miss
Hello,
Esther
everyone.
Jones.
Hello. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. Yes.
So,
I have you been giving it to him. You've been giving it to him.
She is a gifted human who has been a true blessing for our family. And I don't know, do your thing. I don't know what you want to share, but I'm going to step out of the way. I want y'all to hear from my auntie Esther because she is powerful beyond measure and
You put too much
extremely
on it.
gifted.
You put too much on it.
I'm telling the truth. I'm going to step out the way.
He's putting too much on it. I've been listening to his message and it's just amazing. One of the things that we all must realize that time is of the essence. It is time for us to awaken and unplug from, oh, someone's trying to get in. Shall I let him in? I can't. Oh, here you go. Hold on. How do I do this?
Oh, there it is. Just click that. Yep. There you go.
Okay, back. I'm back. One of the things is that it is time for us to awaken and realize that we are divine and we've just forgotten. We need to remember who and what we are. When you ask to awaken, the universe will answer. And you will understand that everything up until this moment you have created as points in your life to help you awaken, to help you realize how powerful you are. So, as I said to Steve and many of my other clients, nothing comes into your world unbidden. Everything that you have experienced, you've called in on some level to help you remember. But the time is now. We're coming to an end of a 25,000-year cycle on Earth, and people are beginning to awaken and ascend to higher vibrational frequencies. And what I love about Steve, I know, I remember when Spirit told me that was my charge. I was like, good luck. I don't know how to help him, but I'm obedient. And I just waited until he called. And when he called, the message was there. He is here to help and support any of you that are ready to step into your calling, that are ready to own your power. You have latent gifts that you have no idea what they can do. And you won't know until you make that decision to awaken, to become aware. Pay attention. All of this that's happening in the world right now is to keep you confused and distracted for what really is important. So I'm just going to reiterate what Steve said. Hello, I'm your alarm clock. Wake up, wake up. So Steve, coming back in. One of the things I think that's really important too, and I tell this to my people, everybody is not on here. I see one, what's her name? Loretta? Is that
Oh, Lynetta.
Lynetta?
That's Miss Lola May.
Miss Lola May, how are you? The rest of them are not here. So you're talking to a screen and you don't see anyone. Why? Why do they not join in and fellowship with each other? That's not a good look. I won't allow that on my teaching. I want to see your face.
That's because I
I want
muted
to
everybody.
see. It's okay to be muted, but you can still see them.
Yeah.
You can still see them to see what they're feeling. You can, that's how you feel their energy, is when you can look at them. And everybody's muted.
You see how this is Auntie.
Yeah.
She don't care we recording. She gonna correct stuff on the spot.
Well, what I'm saying is
I love it.
when everyone can see each other,
Yeah.
then you're fellowshipping.
Yeah.
But when you're looking at a square with a name,
Yeah.
that's not fellowship.
Yeah.
So you guys, whatever you have to do in this moment on Wednesday night at 5:30, prepare to meet and fellowship with everyone else that's here and invite your friends. Those that you truly care about, invite them. Because if they won't hear you, I know they're going to hear Steve. They're going to hear him. So thank you.
Thank you, Auntie.
Thank you for sharing that with me. Love you.
Love you too. Oh, she's the one that told us that Kaya was a girl long before we knew the sex. And she told us why Kaya was here. That's how powerful she is. But as we wrap up, I really want you to understand the simplicity of this whole message. And I want you to ask yourself the question, what would it mean if I was already my highest self? If I was already there? Jesus made it very clear that the kingdom of heaven is within you. But you can only experience that when you let go of the false self, the identity that you have constructed. That's where all of the self-doubt and the fear and the worry and all that comes from. It comes from the false self. And when you let that go, your mind gets quiet. The joy becomes permanent. The peace becomes everlasting. Because you will recognize it's just a construct. And you will be able to see everyone else's construct. You will see what everyone else, the story that everyone else has built You'll watch the movie The Matrix different because you'll be able to see it in real time. The boxes that people put themselves in and the reinforcement because they're consistently creating their realities over and over and over again and reinforcing the narrative that keeps them in bondage. You are not who you think you are, but you are who you think you are. I love you all. I love you, Lola May. I'm so happy every time I see you. Every time I see you, my heart just jumps for joy. You literally light up my day every time I see you. You are special and you are loved. And you're one of the most incredible human beings I've ever met. Thank you. I love you, and I love you all. Set your alarm clock. It's time for you to wake up. If you're on this show, live or watching on YouTube, it's because you're searching. You understand that? It says when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. It's not when the teacher is ready to teach, the students will appear. No. It's when the student is ready, the teacher will appear. When people say, well, Steve, how do you know the student is ready? Because they'll show up on a Zoom on a Wednesday night. You're searching. And one of the most profound things I have learned on my way to mastery is that the search can be over just as quickly as you're willing to let go of this false identity you've created. You'll see the whole thing, why you've made every decision you've made, why you've been in a relationship with every person you've been in a relationship with, why you have felt the way you felt. You'll be able to see all of it. And when you do, it's scary at first, I'm not going to lie. And then it becomes comedy. And you'll go, oh, what a wonderful web you have weaved. It's like when you watch your child completely just torture themselves. And you can see it as the adult. Like, you really don't have to do that to yourself, child. But you think you have to do that to yourself. So I'm going to let you do it. And then one day, they grow out of that behavior because they become consciously aware that flopping down on the ground and screaming and yelling is not going to get me what I want. Well, guess what? That's what the little ego inside of you is doing. It is falling on the ground, flapping in its own way, screaming and crying, trying to get what it wants. But when you recognize your mastery and that you are already your highest self, you will put down these childish games that you play and these childish desires. The story will end. And the new chapter of why you're really here will begin. I love you all. Have a wonderful week. And I look forward to seeing you next Wednesday here on Fruit of the Spirit. Thank you all.